Hi everyone, welcome to Doing Sociology. We are here today with a brand new interview on something very interesting, and we have with us Dr. Meena Gopal, who's an associate professor at the Center for Women's Studies, Pondicherry University. Prior to teaching there, she has taught at the Advanced Center for Women's Studies in TIS Mumbai from 2012 to 2023, and at the Research Center for Women's Studies, SNTT Women's University from 1999 to 2011. Her areas of interest in research and teaching include gender and labor, bodily cultures, sports studies, political economy of health, welfare and development, sexuality studies, and social movements. She has written and published on themes of women in the worlds of labor, sports studies in India, gender migration and labor, home-based industry in South Tamil Nadu, queer and feminist politics, intersectionality, social reproduction. She's completed nearly 22 projects and has around 60 publications in both Indian and international journals, book chapters, web resources, and other publications. In 2006, she was a Fulbright visiting scholar in residence at Trinity College in Connecticut, US. She was also a fellow of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library doing her postdoctoral work in 2009-11 at New Delhi. In 2018, she was a visiting fellow in contemporary India at the University of Sydney, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. She's active in feminist collectives for gender and queer rights in Western India. She's also a former inter-university athletic record holder in heptathlon for women. She wishes to continue the engagement with academics and activism while also pursuing and sharing sports interests. So welcome, Meena. Very happy to have you on Doing Sociology. Before we begin, because we've just mentioned how you were an athlete and you have academic interest in sports, and that brings me to this question on the labor of care in sports, which is something that you write about. So how do you conceptualize the labor of care in sports?
So thank you, Dipali, for this, for inviting me to be part of Doing Sociology. And so starting with the first question that you asked about labors of care in sport. Sport is actually imagined often as a glamorous, elite, competitive realm, connected to issues of nation, pride, things like that, especially when sports person participate in international events or even in national events. However, what goes on behind the preparation of a sports person and the whole system of sport, how it is managed and maintained, I think requires a different perspective. And therefore, I would like to use the perspective of labor in understanding the system of sport, the production of a sporting body, etc. And specifically within that, I'd like to touch upon from a feminist perspective, a labor of care. Because often, for instance, in families, how do parents or even mothers nurture young children to play, to take care of their bodies and to find pleasure and liberation or emancipation in a sport, in play, starting with families to, the school or a sports club or communities that nurture young people. So oftentimes this aspect of care and nurture that goes into preparing a young person to be not just in elite but even in mass sport or recreational sport, as we call it, is often ignored or invisibilized. And that's specifically because from a feminist perspective, we know that the care labors are often invisibilized, given both the Marxist perspective of looking only productive labor, but reproductive labor. So I'd like to posit the care and nurture of people within sport, within that type of a labor perspective of reproductive labor, like we're nurturing and bringing people into a system. Additionally, I'd also like to look at the whole system of sport. For instance, who are the people who build infrastructure, stadium, who are the coaches, the mentors, and then, of course, the most important responsibility of the state itself, so you have Federation of Sports, you have associations, and all of these also involve a whole lot of a care, in the sense of they need nurture, production, investment, funding, and a whole sort of support system that goes into producing. And so I think oftentimes, and especially recently when we saw how the whole issue of the wrestlers, in 2023, the female wrestlers in India came out along with the many male wrestlers to actually point out the lack of care, in fact, violence that happens on their bodies in terms of sexual harassment, intimidation, and control. So I think we really need to look at that aspect, and that's what we need to, sort of unpack and demystify this sort of glamour around sport.
Right. Thank you. That's actually, I mean, you highlight some very interesting things. And I mean, in this context, I would also, be interested in knowing the role of, say, schools, because schools do have, I mean, certain schools would emphasize on sports activities, or even the clubs that you write about. If you could elaborate on them a little more, the role that
Yeah.
these.
Sport, or rather physical education, within the realm of education itself, and what sort of space should sport have within the larger education or building of a young person, and therefore the school plays a very important. Unfortunately, today within our school system, whether it be largely the private, because it isn't, sorry, largely the public, because it is in the public system that a majority of our country's subaltern classes, or those who cannot afford expensive private schooling, go to. Sport is not offered that type of a very legitimate space of building one's sense of self, one's body, building confidence, and all those aspects that come with education, dignity, etc. So we feel that schools need to be spaces where sport have to be nurtured. And at present in India, while they, classes, there is a physical education or PT or physical training session that happens in school, there's no systematized building up or picking of talent or nurturing talent. And I would talk about this in all physical cultures. For instance, whether it's dance, whether it's music, etc., it doesn't happen at the school level. There's an extraordinary premium that's accorded to academic work, to studying and memory by rote. And I think this is also part of the whole caste order, where you privilege mental capabilities and aptitudes and not the physical. So, therefore, the school plays an important role. I mean, but a good thing is that in certain places, certain regions, some private schools, say for instance, the missionary schools do adapt, and they have local sports school competitions, inter-school competitions, etc. But then again, these are small pools or islands that are there. But in, say for instance, the state of Kerala, which at one point in time nurtured a whole lot of athletes, we had what was the Kerala Sports Council, and there were the sports schools. So they would have regular, and this is, you can see in many, I mean, few states in the country, this is practiced, where they encourage schools to have regular competitions. Because along with competitions, you need mentoring, coaching, you also need infrastructure building, investment of that sort. So schools are actually the places where talent is picked up. And that is missing in our education system. And then, of course, there are the clubs, etc., which then prepare people, picking talent from the schools. They prepare people to, build them into, say, competitive level at the regional, state, national level. In my own experience, I was also a track and field athlete, and I studied in a, I mean, again, a sort of Catholic convent school, where the nuns who were in the management and administration, they were very interested in, having an all-round development of children. And so they used to have annual sports, and she would encourage people. And then she would find out that, okay, there's this club in the local area which is nurturing, so let's send our children there. And so there was a conscious attempt in that sense. And that's how I also had a little bit of an athletic career, so to speak. So that way, schools are very important. And this is in the East European countries in the, again, 80s and 90s, schools have played a very important role, or even in the US, colleges become a very important, a space where talent is nurtured and, you enter competition in that sense.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I mean, I just wanted to point out. So I teach in Ranchi, and a lot of Jharkhand, with the students who come from the tribal background, they're all into sports. So just last week, there was a football tournament, and you had more participants and viewers or audiences in a sports activity than you'd ever get in, say, any sort of other collective. So in the university. So yeah, I mean, so very much in agreement with what you're saying about how certain places do nurture, and sports plays such an important role. Just moving on from sports to something again very interesting and important that you write about is your work on women's labor and forms of control on women's labor. So you've done extensive work there. You've written on it. Could you maybe elaborate on the various forms of control in women's labor, and therein the role of caste? How caste sort of creates barriers to women's emancipation, particularly when it comes to questions of labor.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, when we look at it as society is maintained by a division of labor, etc., but it's feminists who's actually pointed out the sexual division of labor as contributing to the subordination of women, and specifically within the Indian social order, caste plays an important role in its intersection with labor. Caste and class in that sense is extremely important. And it's in terms of gendered labor that we really see the control, oftentimes, distortion or neglect or, lack of providing value to the labor that women bring in to maintain society. So, and in this, again, feminists have spoken and written about this enough. And two things that I'd like to talk about, two types of labor. One is the domestic labor specifically. And we do find that the people, or largely those who are within performing paid domestic work in India, now there's a lot of research that's emerging around it, come from the marginal castes in society, right? So marginal castes and even from the tribal communities, oftentimes we do find that today a lot of migration is, I mean, it's been there for a long time, but recognition has now come in terms of increasing research of how, young people from migrant communities are drawn to offer domestic labor in different, and so they move across different spaces. And what happens is, why, if we imagine labor, anybody can perform a labor. But if you look, say, for instance, I've looked at what manual scavenging or the midwife, or even the agricultural labor. If you look there, we find the coming together of what Uma Chakravarti calls caste class, right? The coming together of caste and class is very prominent in some of these labors. And if you look closely, these are also caste-based occupations. And there is a continuity of some of these caste-based occupations in the modern economy as well. And women within those caste-based occupations have actually the most, marginal location. They offer resistance. So, for instance, the midwife would like to somehow get out of her caste-based occupation, but then she also wants to enter the modern economy, paid labor, right? But there she has to. So what happens is the caste-based communities would like to abolish caste-based occupations, but then what about their prevalence in the modern economy? How can you? So this negotiation that women are doing with caste-based labor, etc., is a matter of debate in contemporary society, and we really have to look at it. How can it be? Why is it? So, for instance, why is it that certain forms of labor, sanitation work, is not technologized enough compared to other labors, right? Why is it that this is not modernized enough? So, for instance, if China and Japan can modernize sanitation work, which provides people with enough protection when they work, as well as dignity of labor, value for their work, and respect from the rest of society, rather than, oh, I can make my environment unclean because there are enough people there to come and clean it up, whether it's domestic workers, sanitation workers, etc. And we saw this during COVID also, the heights of devaluation that these particular types of labor and women within them, right? Because even within, say, sanitation work, the contractualized work will go to women, whereas men will be in the more permanent jobs, so to speak, So there itself, the sexual division of labor operates to offer more marginality to women's work. So I think this, when we look at labor itself, we cannot not look at caste. And that's the most important thing. And we're finding there's a continuity. So one is domestic labor, the cleaning occupations, etc., but even sexual labor, so to speak. And in this, feminists have had a very troubled sort of situation between Dalit feminists and non-Dalit feminists. Dalit Bahujan feminists have very legitimately said that oftentimes support for continuation of sexual labor amounts to a reinforcement of caste-based labors. And so how do you then resolve that issue, right? So that's another question that feminists are constantly in debate today. And the voices from the margins will actually add value to that conversation, is what I feel.
Thank you. On that very important point, again, you've talked about domestic labor and, other forms of labor where women subordination takes place. But, there is also the BD industry that you've worked on. And you've highlighted how the production process in the BD industry sort of leads to, or has sort of an inbuilt subordination for women. Perhaps we could hear a little bit about that from you as well.
Yes, of course. So actually, many manufacturing processes in our country are come with a sort of traditional background. They may be caste-based, or they may be region-based, or due to access to certain raw materials. And BD industry is one such where traditionally, the place where I did work with was in South Tamil Nadu. The entrepreneurs, so to speak, or people who set up BD factories, or they started with South Tamil Nadu, but also in North Malabar, Kerala. BD industry actually began in factories where men were actually rolling BDs, where the raw material was procured from, say, Central India, the tobacco from, say, Western and Central India, and then the labor is in these parts. So labor is very conducive in these areas, and so it's much more rational for entrepreneurs to choose these areas to get labor. But once the men started organizing within the factories, and one of the earliest communist movements, so if you read Dilip Menon, he'll tell you the whole history of communist movement actually starts with BD workers, the men who organized, set up trade unions, etc. When this started happening, the entrepreneurs decided that, we have to change the manner of the labor process, the production process. So let's take it to the homes. So immediately the BD started doing the outwork. You offer the raw material, workers will take it to their homes. It started with men, but finally women started becoming the actual producers of BDs, and it became a home-based industry. So from the 1930s to the 1960s, if you see, there's this entire gender transition in the labor process. And you will look for more sort of conducive labor, docile, as a feminist economists have spoken about, nimble fingers and docile bodies. So the entrepreneurs go in search of such forms of labor, and that's how the locate that I had chosen, South Tamil Nadu, one finds. And it's the domestic space within which you become. So there is this very conflation of both your home and your workplace. And there is no account for the hours that you contribute to producing the BDs. There is no other protection, because you are suddenly having to drop your BD work and run to do your domestic activities. Then you come back and then continue this. So there's no specific separation of the workplace and the home. And this naturally adds burden to women, because they then become responsible for the production process to be ongoing. And next day they have to take the raw material to the shop. And when that happens and he finds a BD, the supervisor finds the BDs are not good, he would just break it and throw it back at them, go reproduce and bring it. So this tension and stress actually works against women being empowered and their own sense of being a worker in this larger production process. And we do know that the tobacco industries are one of the highly, uh, earning of revenue in the country. In fact, more than the BD, more than the cigarette, the tobacco industry has been able to avoid taxes because of its being called a traditional industry. And in the mid 2000s, early 2000, there was also a huge battle between the BD owners, um, uh, BD owners as well as the government over having warning signals depicted on the BD packets and the cigarette packets. So it's an ongoing tussle where the WHO regulation is that you have to cover 85% of your BD packet with a warning sign that it's harmful to, so you have to display 3 pictures of a person lying dead and about lungs and a skull and all of that. And BD owners did not want to do it. So they fought a case in the courts for a long period of time. And now they have lost the case, but they continue to, avoid that. And so therefore, using women labor, you are able to make so much of profit. However, you don't then contribute enough to the economy or to women themselves, because there is no protection in terms of proper benefits, or because it's a hazardous, it's not a hazardous industry, but it's very damaging. So healthcare, etc., is not sufficient. So all of these are something that the industry is absolved of. Industry does not care for the working conditions, the benefits that are due to the workers, healthcare, medical benefits, or even like now under the BD and Cigar Workers Act, you have to offer scholarships, specific health checkups, etc. These are all sort of, not addressed enough by the industry. So women's subordination continues, and extraction of their labor with, again, the minimum wages vary across the country. Each state puts its own, wage committees and sets it up. So in a way, Kerala and to some extent Tamil Nadu have the highest rates of wages for BD workers. But if you go to Madhya Pradesh or to West Bengal, you'll find that they don't even get half of what is offered here. So that's the situation, and really how and labor on the backs of women's labor and industry profits.
Thank you, Meena, for that very elaborate, response. And from the BD industry, now I'd like to move to another, area of your research, which is, the movements, the feminist or the queer movement. And you write about how the transversal dialogic political space is used by feminists and queer to further the cause. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. So this has been my learning, actually, being an activist in the women's movement, collectives, like the Forum Against Oppression of Women, based in particular manner of resolving contentious issues, contradictions that come in our understanding and practice, emerged actually with the whole discussion on the bar dancers ban that happened in Maharashtra in 2005. But an understanding of transversal politics also comes in the context of the 33% reservation for women. When the government had announced it, there was protest from, socialist feminists and those from the Samajwadi parties that this will end up having, again, upper caste dominance in the 33% reservation. And they were quite right in that. And Nivedita Menon and others have written about it. And so there itself, how do you resolve it? It can only happen through what we call a dialogic process. So what one understands about transversal politics comes from, just like intersectionality understanding comes from Black feminism. This comes from white and Black feminists, from Hispanic, feminists in the US and in Europe. And Meera Yuval Davis has written about this to talk about how when there are, so we all come with our different positionalities to address an issue, and we may have contradictions amongst us, but how do we then move forward? Because ultimately our objective is to move forward towards a feminist politics of equality and democracy. And so how do we resolve that? Or can it not be resolved at all? So then how do you take that politics ahead is through a dialogic mode, where we come, I mean, in a way, Marx called it the dialectics, but dialectics can also be very violent. Here, the dialogic process can also be extremely difficult, sometimes unresolvable, but we can move ahead and we can think of bringing more voices into the dialogue, you know. So the bar dancers issue actually began in 2005 when the Maharashtra government actually effected a ban saying women cannot dance in the bars because they're corrupting the morale of the youth, you know. And however, these were self-sought livelihoods of these women. And they were coming here to, you know, after having been in different types of labor in the unorganized sector, even sex work, etc., they had come here. And here they found dignity, they found some amount of protection and proper wages that they were entitled to. However, what this ban did was it divided feminists. For instance, Dalit Bahujan feminists actually supported the ban, saying that this was good because the government was intervening and stopping caste-based occupations, reinforcement of that. Whereas the autonomous feminists, those like myself, we felt that this was a matter of right to work, which the government was denying, you know. And it was the union of the bar dancers who approached feminists that we would like to take this up as a, you know, denial or of our fundamental right to work. So then it became a matter of public discussion, court case, a bit of research was done to understand, because till then, you know, even feminists did not know who were these bar dancers and what were they doing, etc. So some research was conducted, and so one of the realizations was that at least 40% of women who are in this profession are from, you know, castes and communities that were traditionally within occupations of sexual labor. So, for instance, nomadic communities, denotified communities were part of this, and some communities from the, you know, Devdasi community, etc. And many of them were migrated to cities to work because within their rural locales, you know, they have to practice this. So Anuja Agarwal has actually written about the Bedia community, how patriarchy and prostitution work together. And so what happens is, so our question was, how do we resolve this issue? This was only possible through a dialogic process. And so so for queer feminists from autonomous spaces and Dalit feminists, we tried to engage with dialogue. We tried to get together, have conversations on who are we, why are we interested in this? And we were also joined by some of the women from the bar dancer community, and the conversation took place. It was not an easy conversation because even, say, for instance, amongst the Dalit feminists, when the bar dancers were speaking, they were saying, we also have histories of exploitation. Some of our family members were, you know, in the sexual labor, and that has hurt us. And so we actually condemn it. And the women who were within the sexual labor professions at present said that then how do you look at, so, you know, it's about a structural understanding versus a rights-based understanding. How do you move ahead between a liberal politics and a sort of radical politics? How do we move ahead? So it is only conversations that can help us. It's only empathy, trust, and some bit of understanding the hurt, histories of hurt that people have gone through. You know, conversations similar to how slavery was discussed amongst white and black feminists in North America. So it is such things. And then slowly, for instance, it even came into the women's studies classroom, where, you know, some of us were speaking about, and there were students also from marginal communities. And then when we had somebody from, say, a trans community or someone from a sex worker community would come and speak with the students, then at first there would be anger, there would be, you know, distrust and, you know, dismissal. But then slow conversations happen. People would speak about their lives. So, for instance, Disha Pinky Sheikh came to when I was working at TISS to speak to the students. So also, you know, Rachna Mudraboina from Telangana Hijra and Sex Workers Organization. So these actually become spaces of conversations, of embodied experience being shared with young people, with academics, with activists. And then how do we take ahead? And, some of the things, especially during COVID, there was a lot of, the NHRC had given a directive that even sex workers ought to be recognized as informal workers. And that was quite something. And it happened because of a huge mobilization, not just of sex workers organizations across the country, but even feminists, young people, those who are working with HIV/AIDS groups, all of them came together to sort of bring this into the public realm. So small such changes, not easy, not all resolved, because sexual labor is still a matter of, deep contention. And so even if they are irresolvable, we can actually take ahead some of these conversations, is our experience and our hope.
Thank you so much for that answer, Meena. And so that sort of now brings us to the end of this interview with you. But before we go, just like if because a lot of our viewers are very young researchers, students who are just venturing into research or early career researchers. So any advice you'd like to give to people who are especially working on questions of gender and labor, or on women's issues? So if maybe we could hear a little bit from you on that.
Yeah, sure. I always feel that we should always go back to history. So the work of feminist historians, as well as others who worked in history, especially histories of labor, histories of movements. I think these are two important things that all students of social sciences need to be aware of. Feminist histories inquiring about labor, labor within the family, community, and its relationship in the labor market itself. So I think that's something, because oftentimes, labor is not a very fascinating and sexy subject. Today everybody is doing, high-tech, state-of-the-art, sort of new evolving, artificial intelligence, internet technologies, and these are the new things that have come in. While there's labor there as well, I'm not denying it. I think we need to go back to histories of labor, especially vast sections like migrants, agricultural labor. What are the lives today of such people? How do we look at them? How do the marginal relate to the larger economy? So I think those questions are very important. And ethnography. So while I give a premium to history, I think ethnography is another important area where we have to really delve into people's lives and specifically, to make inquiries, because people are surviving in the economy. And again, the COVID has taught us a lot of different stories of people who have survived, say in economics, medium and small enterprises, MSMEs as they're called. It's a broad econometric term, but within that, what are the types of labors that communities are, having, and how do people participate in them? Whether it is like garment industry, which is going for export, but who are these people? Weavers, or small producers, manufacturers. So I think in the realm of labor itself, we need to go back to history, but also study the contemporary in depth. That's one thing. So methodologically, we have to be really quite thorough. But we also need to look at some of these non-glamorous areas of research. It is always good to, and to connect them to the larger picture, the picture of change, So that's something. And in terms of movements, yes, I think today a lot of young people, thanks to their own participation in the student movements, post Rohit's passing, a lot of students have come up and recognized the value of social movements, the farmers' movement, but also say the Me Too movement, that is also several such, upsurges have actually brought, and we can see different waves of that, against sexual violence, sexual assault that is today being, seen across the country. So I think histories of movements are also extremely important. And That's another thing. And most of all, to place gender at the center of all our questions. Oftentimes, people take for granted, and it's continuing even today. When you say community, when you say, a particular sphere of labor, everybody assumes gender, caste, and race and all of these intersections. So I would think that those are the sort of areas, and we go back to historical work around this, but a lot of contemporary scholars are also addressing this across the world. I would think that would be a clear area that newer researchers can address.
Thank you so much, Meena. It's been a pleasure listening to you. I wouldn't only say a pleasure. I mean, you've highlighted some very, critical points on themes concerning women, and also, how to go about doing research in these areas. On behalf of Doing Sociology, we thank you for taking time out and speaking to us. And I'm sure our viewers will take a lot from this discussion. So thank you once again.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm really delighted to be associated with you, with the core group and of Doing Sociology. So thank you for this opportunity. I did go and watch the earlier talks, and a lot of interesting people from whom I've also continued to learn from. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Very kind words.